Dystopian fiction has been moved to current affairs.
Hello, and welcome to Dystopian Fiction Has Been Moved to Current Affairs. Claire and Masha here, talking this week about Pantheon, which is a two-season animated show on Netflix, which was new to me, but Masha discovered, and therefore they get to do the summary of this really quite complex show. But I really enjoyed it. So tell us a bit more about it, Masha.
Thanks, Claire. Glad you enjoyed it. Yeah, it's a bit of a hard one to wrap your head around, but the concept's pretty, like, the general premise isn't too bad. So in Pantheon, they live in a world where sort of they discover that these like corporations have got this like underground project of taking human brains and basically scanning them in, like stripping them away layer by layer and getting like an exact copy down to like the molecular level of the brain and uploading all that data to the cloud. And then somehow, like, the person will then live online in the sort of in your systems. So it's called uploaded intelligence. It's like the next step above artificial intelligence. So like, people will like live in a digital world on a computer, and basically gives them sort of like godlike powers. You can like manipulate the digital world around you, and you obviously like think and operate really, really quickly compared to humans. Like I think they say in the show that it's like one minute or something for humans is like a year or something. It was something crazy, like a silly sort of comparison like
Yeah,
that.
that's right, I think.
And obviously, as we all know, corporate overlords and capitalists initially abuse this and basically enslave the uploaded people to do their bidding and get all of their coding and projects and all of that stuff done. Lots of unpaid, cheap, fast labor. So we'll go through that, unethical. And then here comes along our main character, Maddie. Maddie is a sort of secondary school girl, and she has moved to a new place with her mum. She's off in secondary school, having a bad time. Dad's dead. She's not good. And suddenly she gets a little message come up on her computer from an unknown source. And she's like, oh, what's going on? And one thing leads to another. And she basically discovers that her dad's been uploaded to the cloud and that he wasn't dead at all along. And
or was he? I suppose we could say, depending on whether
well,
you think
this is the debatable
death.
thing.
Yeah.
Is it what's death and what's immortality at this point? So sort of she goes down a whole rabbit hole and finds out the company that her dad worked for had in fact uploaded him to the cloud. He's now uploaded intelligence. So there's a version of him running on the cloud, reached out to her, and they start talking through VR, and there's this big conspiracy, and we find out that these uploaded intelligences actually have a flaw. So despite being sort of these godlike, sort of all-reaching digital gods, I've repeated myself there. They in fact have a flaw, which means they kind of deteriorate over time. And this is where we bring in our other main character, Caspian. Caspian, wow, what a strange scenario. Caspian's a whole separate conspiracy attached to the uploaded intelligences, and he is basically, his role on Earth is to solve this fatal flaw so that everyone can upload themselves to the cloud and live happily ever after in a digital world. And this whole concept was sort of come up with this character called Holstrom. What's his first name? Is it
Stephen
Holstrom,
who looks a whole lot like Steve Jobs.
Yeah, like Steve Jobs, Bill Gates kind of vibe. So we find out Stephen Holstrom has like a little cult of people who follow him around, and they're after immortality and sort of uploading everyone to the cloud in their perfect world, and they want to push their ideologies on everyone. And Stephen Holstrom died before his time due to cancer. As we know, we are all sort of susceptible to the physical ailments of the world, and that was unfortunately Holstrom's end. So they thought, oh no, how are we going to solve this sort of issue that is in the way of us ever realizing our dream? We're going to clone Stephen Holstrom, recreate like all of Holstrom's sort of main sort of infliction points in his life so that we can recreate him exactly as is in a cloned form to solve the singularity. So that's who Caspian is. So he's a little test tube baby. And yeah, him and Maddie end up teaming up, trying to solve the singularity as sort of more uploaded intelligences come onto the cloud. They start wreaking havoc. Caspian and Maddie decide that it's their mission to find the sort of like overlord of all uploaded intelligences, to govern everyone, to give the cure to, so that they would be like the strongest one. And yeah, I guess that sort of like gets us to the sort of point where Caspian sort of fights off Stephen Holstrom, who's on a rampage, because we find out that despite Stephen Holstrom dying, when Caspian solves the singularity, which is the like problem of the floor, Holstrom is in fact a cryogenically frozen brain that's going to be brought back to life on the cloud. So that's what they do. He becomes a bit of a villain. We fight him off. Caspian technically dies. Maddie's dad dies like 3 times. So there you go. Extra ethical questions to dissect down the line about, oh, what makes you a person if I can just copy and paste you?
Yeah.
Which tune in for our next episode on 17 to hear more about that. And yeah, and then there's a sort of big mind-boggling ending in the last 2 episodes, which is great because they wrap everything up and you're like, wow, what a
wrap everything up in a layer of new confusion.
Yeah, a layer of new confusion. And it becomes a bit sort of out of the box thinking. And I don't know whether you need to have a level of coding that me and Claire do not have to understand
maybe
what's going on. But then it's suddenly like everything's the gist is everything's a simulation. There's multiple realities, and Maddie becomes a god.
But not like the most goddy of gods, because they are sort of like they're a metamorphosis of the virus that was being used.
Yes, and there's a bloody virus. So, it's long. It's a long show. It's got 2.
Yeah. Although having said it's long, it's 2 seasons, and they're what, like 8 episodes of about 45 minutes. So it's funny, isn't it?
They fit in a lot, I think.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was just thinking. Because you compare that to some of the other shows that we've done, and actually, I guess it's partly the complexity of the ideas. But yeah, well done, Marsha. I'm quite sure everybody is following.
That's quite difficult. You wouldn't imagine.
No. Well, we're going to talk about some of the concepts. We were saying that we've sort of touched on a few of these things before, but never looked at any material that goes into the depth that this does. But it's obviously something that's playing around in science fiction a lot at the moment. We saw in Years and Years, which, pleased to say, is on Netflix now. So anybody who didn't watch it at the time and didn't listen to our show needs to go back and listen and watch it, because it's such a good series. But that incorporated the idea of transhumanism and the ultimate sort of version of that being to remove the body altogether rather than just implanting technology and so on. So it finishes with a very similar idea of uploaded intelligence. And we also looked at the idea of a brain being the entirety of a person when we were looking at 3-body problem, although unfortunately his brain got catapulted off into space. So much for that. No. But we raised some of the questions that I think really are at the heart of this, which is, I suppose, essentially uploaded intelligence and personhood, whether these are people, and obviously the associated ideas around the rights and responsibilities of people, and, as you were mentioning, ideas around enslavement that requires you to have some sort of capacity to consent and a sense of ownership over your own being and your own labour. So all of these things play in here. I told Marsha I was going to ask them about the idea of the brain as an independent source of kind of the nature of a person, just because they know so much more science than me. So
Thanks.
What's your feeling? This
I mean,
major issue.
me and Claire were trying to discuss this before the show started, and as the designated scientist of the team, um, it's something I want to do a bit more research on. So don't take my word as law. There'll be watch out for our coming newsletter on the topic.
Yeah.
But I don't know, because yeah, you said to me, okay, you've got the brain, and then you've got all of these other things happening in the body, like hormones and all these things that also control your mood and all these other variables. So what happens when you like remove like how you're removing your susceptibility to that and your ability to respond to those like physical cues in your environment and within your own body, and like what does that mean? But as far as I understand it, it feels like the brain has a bit of a baseline, and like obviously stuff like hormones then influence like causes a fluctuation from that baseline, whether it's like variability, like more like like motions or whatnot. But I mean, yeah, I think what's interesting to me as well is very classic show called Sword Art Online back in the day. I used to watch it, but in the concept of that show, they have it's basically these people get stuck in a VR video game, and they sort of like live digitally within the world, but it's all VR, so they still have their like physical bodies in the real world, and they're just stuck there for like 2 years. But it's also like, how do they to code something like this game where they have like these people can perceive like taste and touch and like all of these things within the shows. Like, how have they, like, for them to have been able to, for these like game developers to have been able to do this? And I don't know how this translates over to like uploaded intelligence in a digital world, but for these like the developers would have had a way, need to have had a way to kind of like record all of these different sensations in the real world and then program that into something that can be translated into a feeling in the digital world. So I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. I think that there must be something, I think, that we need to consider that distinguishes the idea of kind of the UI from a very sophisticated AI. And I think that the experience of having lived in the embodied world and the memory of that must play into it
Yeah,
significantly. Because one of the things we see, of course, is the way in which they essentially have to learn to disconnect from feeling like you're still restricted by a body. So
body, your
everything you were
body,
saying
yeah.
about kind of becoming more becoming faster, being able to do things that you couldn't do with a body, you have to stop thinking it's like, when a UI is programming something, for example, they'll be using a keyboard, and the argument is, of course, well, you don't need to use this keyboard. You are you're of the same matter. This is all data in the cloud, so you don't need to use this. But of course, the idea of being embodied is very deeply sort of set into their experiences. So I wonder if there's something about kind of remembering the combination of things that bring about emotional shifts and so on, which obviously, includes a number of different things, including stimulating different parts of the brain, but also, as you say, release of hormones and things like that, which play into it. So, yeah, it's interesting, I think. I suppose what we're supposed to be led to think is that you enter a different, as it were, stage of personhood once you are disembodied. And they do seem to strive to recreate certain aspects of the embodied experience, particularly to do with sex, even though as some of the UIs become more sophisticated, they seem to be engaged in an intimacy that is far
It's far sort of
greater.
greater.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That even though it doesn't involve what we would consider to be kind of physical intimacy, but it's like the
Well, also
interconnectedness.
at the point that you're in a UI, do you even end up getting those urges anymore? I don't know. And
Oh.
also, like, well, of course, I mean, it makes sense they wouldn't have sex in, I guess, the more classic way, because it's like you're not reproducing anymore. Like, There's no. That's also like crazy. Is like at the point that you start uploading people to the cloud, they're there forever. Considering the cloud that runs forever, they're going to be there forever. And there's
Mm.
also if everyone on the planet is now becomes uploaded, then there are no new humans. I don't know. It's
Mm.
interesting. So that sort of
I suppose without the flaw, at any rate, they would be eternal, and therefore there is no need for repopulation.
mm,
It's not really a concept that we can understand because
yeah,
of
or
mortality,
comprehend. But
but
would it effectively be the end of the human race, even if people were like again there's that big question is like are these people human still
mm,
and like if the whole planet becomes empty of
mm,
humans and we're all uploaded on the cloud despite
mm,
people's like consciousnesses being on
mm,
there like what does that
mm,
mean like do we still count as a species are we technically
mm.
extinct what does that I don't know
Yeah,
where does that
I
fit
think
in
that that's a really interesting point because one of the sort of things that they try to sell it on is this idea of kind of an overpopulated planet
mm,
depleting resources and the idea that, without bodily existence, then the planet can kind of readjust itself and so on. But I'm deeply unconvinced by this. I feel like they make no good case at any point to say that the vast amount of power needed for the
yes
servers
yeah
is
isn't just as
going to
bad
be, yeah, exactly. I'm not
uh,
convinced why that would be less in terms of impact on the environment than the living of people, especially if those people lived in a low carbon way.
yeah
Um, we know already that even the inclusion of AI into our lives in the way that it's started to happen in the last year or two has had this huge impact in terms of
impact
the
yeah
server power.
and then
I was reading something the other day, just people
yeah
saying thank you to ChatGPT is like this massive carbon footprint. Just
what oh no
yes. And I also think that and I might be wrong about this, I might just be being really kind of backward, but is it really possible for UIs to perpetuate the entire infrastructure that is required for? I mean, I suppose if they can power robots and so on, which we see they ultimately kind of do, in terms of being able to sort of enter suits and become embodied, then maybe there is a possibility that they could basically run a system that makes sure that their server buildings don't fall down and things like that. But I don't know. Are you always going to end up with essentially an inferior kind of human enslaved class? We're sort of told that there's this utopia, aren't we, where they will do
well
all the
all
mean.
it's all automated like by the so like
That's
there's
right.
in the future now this is like it's what 10 years into the future 15 years into the
Uh,
future found a ways to make sort of animatronics for their UI so that they can
mm,
sort of be in the physical world and like interact with people which I think is quite clever and
mm,
interesting and I really liked that concept that they brought in. But like it says that yeah, it's like a utopia. They managed to find enough money. All of the UIs took everyone's jobs, and they managed to make enough money to fund a universal income, and like everyone just works and chills out, and all the UIs do it really fast like this, so there's no like worries about it. Um,
yeah.
I don't know. What do you think of that?
I mean, obviously, it's the this sort of ideal around where technology could take us, but it's not our experience in terms of how people generally react to these things so far. We're seeing AI creating art and stuff like that, so it doesn't leave people, time to do
Quite
all these
convinced.
wonderful things. Yeah, but
Mm.
also just if we go back to kind of one of the earliest points in the show, it's about the power and control that is held by corporations, and don't see any reason why corporations. I mean, doesn't seem to be any reason why, if you are a UI, you would suddenly feel that you wouldn't want to be better than everybody else in the same way that, becoming Elon Musk or whatever has an
Yeah.
attractiveness, even though somebody with that level of wealth could eradicate world poverty.
Yeah.
So maybe altruism doesn't apply to the UIs, but certainly while they're still in the stage that you need essentially a company to be uploading people, and somebody's got to be putting in the investment, they expect something out of that investment, including profit, which, as you say, leads to the enslavement of the UIs, and also corporate ownership. So Maddie's father, David, is Logarithm, the company that he used to work for, claims that it owns him. And I was thinking that even when he gets transferred into the server in the family basement, he's still in a way kind of owned by
Logarithms.
yeah, well, because they
By his
obviously
family.
but also his family, yeah. So Logarithm keep a backup, so in that sense they maintain that they still have a right over him, and the family also essentially has this great power over him because they
It's like
own the
he's
hardware.
constricted to the hardware. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, oh, you're all powerful, but then if your server's cooked, you're cooked. So
Yeah,
but
exactly.
that's
Because we
again,
see a terrorist attack, don't we, that wipes them
well,
out. In fact,
yeah,
it's kind of easy to do in a way if they've got,
yeah. Well, there you go. It's like ultimately you are still connected to the physical world, despite the fact you don't want to be. You're just not. Obviously, a computer's not going to be ailed by things like illness. But then, obviously, down the line, we have SafeSurf, which is like the computer virus that the government creates, which is like the equivalent of. So
yeah. Should we talk a bit about SafeSurf? Because it's obviously what we deal with a lot in this is the fact that UIs have superior power to human beings in the sense that if you've got just like any very sophisticated hack or virus, the ability to wipe out elements of the human world, either through software like attacking the economy, banks, things like that, but also through launching loose nuclear missiles, which we see is done. So there's this power that the UIs have, and the only way of combating that is through the creation of a virus that wipes them out, which is where they create SafeSurf. So, what did you feel about the ethics of SafeSurf and whether it was a justified response from
I
the
mean,
American government, isn't it? Because
I feel, to be fair, the American government's done a lot worse, and I like, especially at a point where it feels like you've got nuclear weapons basically ready to be like gone at any point, and like these just random people are able to have access to this like awful weaponry, and it's like obviously it's a bit of a fear of the unknown, but like yeah, especially with what's that guy's name who gets uploaded and he murders that family? Oh, he's
Chanda.
like Chandler. Oh, I loved him. I know he was kind of a bad guy, but I had a little soft spot for him. But like obviously seeing what Chandler could do with just like taking over. So Chandler gets wrongly uploaded. It's this horrible sort of moment at the beginning of the show where he gets uploaded while still conscious. And like you can see sort of the lasers zapping away layers of his brain as he sort of becomes vegetabilized, and it's quite horrible. But he goes out and kills when he like becomes conscious from his like state, from his like work state, enslaved state. He goes and murders the man and his family that like did this to him, and yeah, that's quite horrific. And obviously that like level of access to technology, and like this is the thing about like smart homes that everyone's like, this is when the AIs are going to take over. So suddenly your smart home is going to turn against you.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I don't know. I think it's justified, especially for like such a small number of people who are at that point uploaded. If you're thinking about it
Yeah.
from a utilitarian perspective, it's like, okay, either get a whole city nuked, as Chanda was threatening to do to. He was quite a horrible guy, to be fair. I don't know why I'm that like I'm that sympathetic towards him, but he was threatening to nuke. Oh, where do they live?
Sacramento.
Sacramento. I was like Santiago. That's not right. Sacramento. He was threatening to nuke Sacramento, so I feel like safe serve.
Yeah. I mean, there's a very interesting sort of narrative going on with this balance between power in the US and including corporate power. So Logarithm as an American company, admittedly they keep their secret servers in Norway, but they're an American company, versus their competitor creating parallel technology in India. And although logarithms were evil, there was, I thought, something of a kind of imperialist undertone to the idea that, yes, but of course in India they are even worse.
Yes.
So in
Yeah,
America
yeah.
we're sophisticated evil, and in India they're kind of base evil. And which I mean, you see this with a lot of, I suppose, kind of
Like Western, I'd say.
Western-led narratives. Exactly.
No, absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
I mean, there were lots of other countries involved in all of this, including
Yeah.
Israel and Russia and so on.
Yep.
But these two corporations were in balance, and I guess the idea, I suppose, of the threat of a country like India being able to outstrip the tech in America and using people from the lowest castes and who living in slums basically to test this technology on makes them even more the bad guys. And Chanda's response, I suppose, is in part to the way that he is treated, in part to the fact that he starts negotiating with Western companies for the idea of kind of giving up his knowledge, and therefore he gets punished for it. But yeah, Chanda becomes something of a sort of megalomaniac. But again, he's one sort, and then Holstrom is another sort of the same thing. So I guess they're exploring different ways in which these aspects are problematic. And with the idea of safe serve, there's of course no discrimination between kind of identifying Chanda or Holstrom and identifying, well, people like David, for example, who in theory is the sort of UI you want to have. Obviously, this is all this idea about the ethics of whether you can kill something that is essentially, whether it's alive or not, whether a UI is alive. What do you think? Does it just make us need to reconsider what the nature of being alive is? Or are they alive?
I mean, well, this is very specific definition of what is considered alive and not alive in biology. And by like, if we're going by that definition of
tell me
to
that.
respire and defecate and all of these things, like there's a bit of a list. Then no, like they're not alive. They're not alive. Like the same way that like viruses aren't considered alive. They don't tick all those boxes. So yeah, if we're gonna go by like the biology definition, definitely not. And I think it also gets, again, with with logarithms holding copies of David and Maddie's dad, like what does it then mean if you can just be copied and pasted out? And then what does that even mean for like clones of you? Like if you just what's stopping people just like copy and pasting David out 1,000 times and there's just 10 of them just sort of like running around everywhere? And like how does that work? Like what happens when they interact?
And in a way, it's almost surprising that given the way in which they're using them for continuing their work after death, in the same way that they're kept on a loop so that they never essentially realize they're experiencing the same day over and over and over.
Yeah.
I'm sort of surprised that they don't create kind of like multiple copies of them as well.
Yeah, because wouldn't it just be much faster to do all the work anyway?
Yeah.
But then I guess you've got to kill off multiple copies. Like if they all escape, then you're also a bit cooked.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, I suppose after things started to go wrong.
Yeah, so good south.
I mean, there's an interesting sort of reflection on the development of kind of consciousness and things like that, and the idea of communication as being part of kind of what makes you maybe not alive, but like a personhood. That seems to be
like
quite a big
love
thing.
And like connection, and it's like those emotional elements is what like brings David back, and like all of these other people back to sort of consciousness from the.
And also solves the flaw, ultimately.
And solves the flaw,
sort of we're told that there's kind of like almost like a love particle, aren't we? Sort of.
That is a bit like friendship and
I know.
Love.
It was a bit.
I was a bit like, okay, all right. Settle down. We get it. You have to have a nice little message go out into the world about love and peace. And all of
Yeah.
that,
Um,
woke nonsense. I'm joking. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I did like the idea about language, the idea that to start with, when David was sort of accustoming himself, that's not a word, becoming accustomed to being liberated and existing as a UI, he communicates via emojis, the sort of sense that instead of communicating through, I guess, a more sophisticated language, which ultimately their language becomes more and more sophisticated because essentially, a UI doesn't need words in the technical sense. But I thought that was quite interesting. This idea of kind of the sense of growth into self being reflected through language. I was
Yeah,
partly thinking
yeah.
about this because I just read a book called The Quiet, which essentially is a sort of dystopia based around ideas of genetic atavism reigniting a gene for a kind of proto language where in children are no longer developing spoken language skills in the way that obviously the majority of people do now, but rather developing different ways of kind of communicating, including it's got a lot to do with music and things like that. But it just made me think about, well, to what extent, and there's obviously a level of kind of ableism in this, do we connect personhood with ability to communicate linguistically? It should presumably become the case that a UI doesn't need any form of language because the sort of transmission of data is in itself
Yeah. Well,
replacing
that's
language.
that's what happens sort of like towards the end of the
Mm,
yeah, towards the end of this, like they're saying like how the AIs and the CIs, which we'll
mm,
talk about as well in a bit, but like
mm,
they don't like the way that they communicate is like out of like human like a speed and even like
mm, mm,
understanding is just like much quicker. And this is like yeah, and this is really happening with AIs as well. I think I saw a video where they were just getting like two chat GPTs to like talk to each other and they're like, let's switch to this like weird sort of bloop, 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 bloop. So it was
mm.
sounding noise, and apparently, like me, I don't know, maybe it was fake. To be fair, I need to fact check this. I'm always a bit wary of what I see on the internet these days, but like, it makes
But
sense
the
that
premise
that's what
does make
happened. Yeah,
sense, doesn't it? Because there's absolutely no
absolutely.
reason to filter through.
Like
Um,
human language, like
exactly. Yes.
to turn
Yeah.
to human.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is also what I found. I think is intrinsically human about the UIs is that they do develop and they do learn and
Mm,
like their code like as far as I remember it sounds like their coding kind of evolves and stuff and I think
mm,
that's like maybe for me it was like some part fundamentally human is that you are
mm,
growing and you're evolving and you are responding and adapting to your
mm,
environment but you can also argue the same things happening to artificial intelligence as well. There's that kind of element of like, okay, it's like sort of a lot of artificial intelligence is now kind of like self-training. You don't
mm,
have to have someone sat there at a computer being like, yes, this is
mm,
correct and this is wrong. But obviously, you got that. I think with artificial intelligence, there's that issue of data. It's like you
mm,
garbage in, garbage out. If you
mm,
like put in bad data, it's going to be a bad AI. It's not
mm,
going to be doing you anything useful. Whilst
mm.
like with humans, we can like sort of look and at data and be like, okay, is this and kind of make our own deductions of like, is it good data? Is it bad data? Like,
Mm,
what's missing? What's not
mm.
missing?
And I guess that the flaws, not the flaw with capital F, but the flaws more widely in the sort of UIs are what we would recognize as mostly kind of human
Yes.
flaws.
Yeah.
Um, and the sort of positives about them are kind of human positives. I mean, they're trying to build spaces for their existence. They want to experience things within a kind of, artificially built environment, for example, or create societies. Self-present is another thing. There's arguably no need for visual form, as it were, and yet by the end we've got people presenting themselves in every form of kind of person, mythological creature, sort of something made up from a game or whatever, all of
Mm.
these different presentations. So all of those feel kind of fundamentally human. And then by contrast, we have the idea that their flaws are sort of fundamentally human as well. There's the sort of the hatred that Chanda feels, and there's the arrogance of Holstrom, the elements of hubris, the selfishness, and so on that we don't associate with an AI being able to create these things, which I suppose is supposed to be the sort of fundamental improvement of UI over AI. What about CI? You mentioned it a moment ago. Do you want to
I
explain
don't
what that
even
is?
quite understand what CI. Do you know what it stands for actually? Because I didn't have a chance to look this up.
Cloud intelligence, I
Intelligence,
think.
and this is
So
different to artificial intelligence. Like this is what I didn't understand. It's like you're just a slightly better version of artificial
yeah, I
intelligence.
mean, it's because it's born out of a combination of code from two UIs. It contains, I guess, the coded version of what we would consider to be the most human form of AI. That must be what it is. It seems to exist independently, but has never been corporeal. Essentially, it's what happens if two UIs have a baby, right? I mean, that's
Yeah. This is the
essentially.
reproducing part, but then
Yeah.
the two UIs from before die. I'm not quite sure what's
Yeah.
going on.
It seems to be also a byproduct of how to fix the flaw. So I guess it's associated with
Yes.
the idea
So
of love and producing
yeah,
children and
cringe.
yeah. Um, but it does create an interesting thing insofar as, this question of Mist, who is this CI, isn't viewed ultimately the same way as the UIs, doesn't get the same rights and so on, because it's almost like the UIs have some sort of precedent over the CIs because they have once been embodied. They're all uploaded from actual people, as it were.
Mm.
But yeah, that's an interesting bit. But obviously, having never been human in the embodied sense, the CIs are able to achieve things because they've never been restricted, I guess, by their existence. And yet they also want to know what it's like to be embodied. So what does Mist gets put in a robot with made out of a rice cooker?
Yeah, rice cooker. That's so cute. Yeah.
But is ultimately, I think, just wants to know what it's like. It's really pissed off by like how slow and annoying it is having to
Yeah,
keep to the
yeah,
body. Um,
yeah.
Shall we talk about Caspian then and cloning?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
this is, they don't concern themselves with merely a single massive ethical dilemma, but
Yeah, it was a lot. There was a lot going. I just can't imagine. Like, I don't understand how they managed to fit all of it into like 16 45-minute long
yeah,
episodes. It's mad. It's mad. Um, yeah, I mean, Christ. Yeah, imagine your whole existence is just like a lie. We find out that like Caspian's mum and dad, like obviously not his real mum and dad, are just like actors and were Stephen
mm,
Hallstrom's friends and sort of like were put up to, you know, I guess like faking 18 years of like
mm.
marriage and then domestic abuse and involved hammers and broken arms and fake girlfriends. Oh, just
Mm.
crazy. The fake girlfriend was crazy. We
Mm.
Hannah in the show we discover is an actor hired to
Mm.
basically become Stephen's girlfriend, but she gets killed off.
Caspian's
Which
girlfriend.
Caspian's girlfriend. Oh, that was a
Presumably to like
whoa,
reflect on the
faux
fact that
pas.
Stephen also had I know this is what they want you to
Yeah,
think.
yeah,
It's the
yeah.
same
So no,
person.
literally, it's the same person. They're different people, and that's an important difference to make. Anyways, which we'll talk about the whole like nature versus nurture and what it
Mm.
means, like
Mm.
genetics, and like how does that, what does that mean? Yeah. So yeah, because it's interesting to me that we see that the Hannah, who's meant to be Caspian's girlfriend, like representing the girlfriend that Stephen had at that age, she dies in a car crash. We
Mm.
see her. This is like after we kind of reveal like that whole kind of conspiracy breaks down with like Hannah and
Mm.
stuff, and Caspian finds out the truth. But yeah, were they gonna plan on killing this girl to make sure everything else is like up to speed, or I don't know.
Yeah,
There's a weird like one to sort of see. It was like quite ominous. It was like, oh, what would have happened if this
they
had kept
certainly
going?
seem to be happy to go to almost any length, don't they? It raises these great questions, that apparently Stephen claimed that he would never have been who he was were it not for the trauma in his life. And obviously, we're all shaped by our experiences, but it does seem
Excessive.
problematic
Yeah.
and excessive, and especially to inflict this suffering onto another person.
Yeah.
And we see in the way it plays out with his dad, dad inverted commas, Carey,
Mm.
who really struggles with the idea that he has to be seen as abusive by his son, as he, having looked after him all these years, he finds it very hard to go through with any of it. Whereas Renee, the mother, is more psychopathic.
Yes, Renee is
And
sort of
very,
crazy.
very. I mean, we learned that she was, Stephen Holstrom's lover and also kind of his disciple, and so she's pretty much willing to do anything at all to
Anything, yeah.
fulfill his vision. But it certainly leaves Caspian with this question, I guess, about whether he is a person in his own right, because he has been created in a very similar way to
Yeah.
creating a program or something like that.
Yeah, ultimately, like with them trying to recreate Stephen Holstrom in Caspian, like it was never, they live in literally completely different times. They live 40 years apart, and like the types of like problems that Caspian experiences would have been completely different to the ones that Stephen was experiencing. And even on the basis of the fact, okay, like they're basically twins, yeah. And this is actually quite strange. I can't remember where I read this about a boy, like this family who had a boy and frozen his like twin, I guess not twin, but like frozen some eggs that were like I can't remember if they were already fertilized, but like it just like cryogenically frozen these eggs, reimplanted, and this guy had like a twin 8 years after he was born. It was quite strange, but that's basically what Caspian is. But yeah, like even for you've got your genes, which are identical if you have a clone or a twin, and then you've got your epigenetics, which is like different little modifications to the DNA. So it's like methylations or other things, add some other proteins and stuff to it as well. Like there's different things you can modify, and those epigenetics is then what kind of creates that divergence with people who are clones, not clones, people who are twins. So hopefully not clones. Hopefully there aren't any clones walking around the earth, but who are twins. Yeah, because obviously like identical twins will diverge and become more different as they age, and that's due to like environmental influences, and you just can't control. You just like ultimately can't control everything down to the minutiae, and it's just I don't know. It just seems silly because also like what's to say that all of the trauma that Stephen Holstrom experienced as a child wasn't actually just holding him back?
Well, exactly. I think that's a very interesting point. Have you read any of the work of Robert Plomin?
No, I haven't. Blueprint.
Yeah, so I think you find this very interesting. A friend of mine recommended it a while back. Plomin's a psychologist, but he's also a behavioral geneticist. And this particular book, Blueprint, is about how our DNA essentially is, in his opinion, or through his studies, which are mainly looking at twins, particularly twins who have been brought up in separate environments. So twins who were separated at birth for whatever reason, particularly adopted into different families and different environments, and how ultimately he argues that really environmental issues are almost negligible in comparison with genetics. That's what his research has basically proved. I was talking to my sister about this the other day because we were talking about educating her children, and when they get to secondary school, options and things like that. And one of the things that Plomin argues, at least, is that it really doesn't matter. Like the differences of what school or whatever you go to are in terms of actual kind of achievements and things so negligible.
Really?
Yeah, which is incredibly depressing for somebody who works in education and thinks that you can make a difference. It's not obviously in keeping with some of the other sort of sociological studies and things like that, but it is interesting. And so yes, I think you make a really good point. There's an argument to say that he could have reached his full potential if he was in a properly nurturing environment. And of course, Caspian does achieve something that Stephen failed to achieve, because he finds the cure to the flaw. And
who's the better clone now, Stephen?
Exactly, yeah. And almost like it was at the point at which their lives deviated, where the plan started going wrong, that he was able to do that many years before he was supposed to, as it were. But we also learn, of course, that Caspian is purely, what's the word, he's a tool being used by logarithms,
by
just like
logarithms,
the UIs are. And the manipulation of him, even after he knows that he is a clone, is a pretty tough idea to watch. How plausible did you find the kind of societal responses to UI?
I think they did it quite well. I think they portrayed it quite well. There was definitely like, people are definitely not very open to change is sort of the general consensus that is I found and through research. But definitely one like, oh, we should all upload our intelligences to the cloud. Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. So when oh my God, Stephen Hallstrom's lover called Renee, when she kind of like goes on her little disciple, kind of like prophet, little kind of spiel, and she kind of recruits a face to the movement towards uploading intelligences. Just talking about how like there was like that disabled boy who had some sort of growth issues and he
progeria, the one that makes you become really old when you're still young.
Quite young. Yeah. And we've obviously got people who are like all for it, and I can definitely see like those applications with uploading intelligence where, for people who aren't able-bodied to be able to let go of like your physical, I don't know, I guess like for some people it might be like a bit more of an imprisonment.
Absolutely.
Like,
I mean, if you think about people who got, who are locked in or something like that, then, the idea that the brain functions and the body doesn't work in the same way, there could be an appeal there.
I wonder what happens as well when you, sorry, I will come back to answering your question, but I wonder what happens when you upload someone like in a like coma or like a vegetative state. What happens then?
I mean, this is one thing that struck me, that there's, okay, so we've got, cryogenics and questions about whether, a brain would be just as effective and so on. That's one issue. But there's also, as you say, the state of the brain. So I guess some of it comes back to kind of what would happen if the limitations of the brain were removed from its sort of physicality. So we're talking about the condition that I suffer from, myalgic encephalomyelitis. It's a full body condition, but it also has lots of presence in the brain. And one of the things that it does is it reduces your brain function in various ways, including stuff like being able to regulate your own temperature, but also just in being able to use your intelligence. So it slows your ability to process, things like that. Basically makes you less clever is my experience. But so then I'm thinking, well, okay, before I got this illness, my brain was quite good. I was quite happy with it. It was a good thing. If I were removed from the physical issues with my brain, would it return to where it was before once it wasn't being, impacted by disease? I suppose, and if Stephen Hallstrom's cancer had spread to his brain, for example, would everything else have been impacted by that, or would they be able to essentially retrieve and within the scope of the UI world be able to rebuild?
I don't think so. I don't think. Yeah.
I'm not going to get myself uploaded then. No, that's my decision.
Is that the decision?
No, yeah.
No, I don't think. I think it would be very much like, so in biology, for example, if you're, you've grown some cells in a dish and then you want to like go and image them under a microscope, and you want to, you want to look for specific proteins that are being expressed within a cell. What you'll do is like you'll add some formaldehyde to it, and that's basically like a glue that like glues all the molecules together like this, and they can't move. So like the very state that the cells are fixed in, they'll be like that, and that's it. And I think that's just probably the same thing with the brain. Like at the point that you're getting uploaded, is you're going to be your peak performance. I think. It makes sense. And then I feel like it'd get very complicated if you were like trying to go and digging around. Obviously we got Mist, who tries to rebuild Caspian after he gets infected with Safe Surf, which takes her like 10-15 years to do.
Yeah, that's right.
But it's interesting. Like, especially if you were for example, a dementia patient who was like deteriorating, that would actually be an interesting, like, that'd be such a an option, I guess, to maybe like see. But yeah, I guess depending on how far through you are, which stage you're at of like deterioration, then I don't know. It's interesting. And then I also disease then continue translating into the digital world. Like,
Well, I
well,
think that's
is it written
interesting, isn't
in
it? Yeah, yeah. So
the flaw reinstalled?
yeah, so if it was something that was effectively, I don't know, affecting kind of neural pathways and things like that, would that just be translated into the digital equivalent of the neural pathway? Yeah, I think we're finding some problems with this as a future.
Yeah. Plot holes. What's going on?
But I guess, yeah, there would always be people who sort of think that this is something they want. But I do think that showing the societal response of fear to the unknown, and also like very real fear that somebody's going to drop a nuke on your house, right? I mean, there is an element of that, and that your country can't do anything about it. Versus quite quickly, the can't believe you shut down our internet.
Yeah,
just to save us all. And I think that sort of switch would happen very quickly as well. Ultimately, what we sort of see is obviously like this idea of the UIs as becoming kind of dominant species, and a restriction on to what extent embodied humans can police them. We get a sort of new sense of world hierarchy, I guess. Do you want to explain the ending, since you did some nice little notes on this, because this is a show that takes a whole lot of kind of wild ideas, makes a very convincing job of them, and then takes us into a whole other level of
oh my god, crazy
idea at the end.
So Stephen and Caspian sort of leave it of them battling it out. They get eaten up by Safe Surf. Sad times, but we sort of skip 10 years into the future or something like that. A good couple years.
Yeah, it is. It is. I think it's a decade. Yeah, that.
And Maddie.
Actually, no, it must be more than that because the kid is 18, isn't it? So.
Oh yeah. Actually, so true. 18 years, 20, almost 2 decades.
Yeah, they're rashly conceived.
One time. One night stand baby. Which also, like, being a biomed student, you actually realize how often pregnancy, it's a crazy statistic of like a good, I don't actually test me on this, but a good portion of babies' conceptions gone. So it's just sometimes I'm like, oh, when you had sex once, you're having a child, it's mad. But I mean, chances are real things. So anyway, it's not important. I was just like shocked. Anyways,
don't play those odds.
Don't play those odds.
Even if they are very slim.
Stay very safe. But yeah, anyways. So yeah, Maddie has a son, it's Caspian's son, also technically Stephen Holstrom's son. Very just weird. Technically, when you think about it, very strange. And then so there's some stuff that happens. Safe Surf sort of comes back because it got locked away. Oh God, I don't even know how to start explaining what happens in the show.
My understanding of what happens with Safe Surf, at least, is that Caspian essentially gives Safe Surf the Safe Surf, which is now kind of populated with the UIs that it's eaten. Essentially, it's got the potential to learn and change. So it becomes
conscious.
Yes,
because it's got AI integrated into it. Yeah.
And as it eats the UIs, it incorporates their experiences and data, and therefore it becomes essentially a hybrid, I guess, of AI and UI and a virus, and it thus becomes in its way superior. But Caspian shows compassion to it rather than its destruction, and because of the UI elements to it, it is able to understand the idea of kind of mercy,
empathy, mercy,
and empathy. And so off it goes into the universe to develop to become
sort of a higher being.
Yeah.
So Caspian sort of gets brought back to settle some disputes between the UIs and the humans, and the humans are led by Maddie. And we also find out Maddie's mum's uploaded to bloody love Maddie's mum. Maddie's mum's uploaded to the cloud Crazy. Yeah.
raising a whole question because she's in a
I
new
know.
relationship with somebody who's uploaded
Yeah.
Peter, yes,
And then David comes
and then
back.
David comes back.
Ah, what?
It's like,
What?
the parable of who you marry to in heaven kind
I
of.
know, literally. Yeah. Anyways, at some point before sort of Caspian and Safe Surf come to like an agreeable end, Safe Surf goes on a bit of a rampage, and this is proper like sort of Terminator vibes. The animatronics come to life and start gunning everyone down. Maddie's son dies, Caspian dies, everyone's dying, and this is a kind of like point where Caspian says something about
Yes.
117,649 years. We just sort of at this moment don't really know what this number means. And there's some sort of stuff that happens. I can't quite connect the dots. And then suddenly we realize we're in a simulation and Maddie's in this like massive kind of big red plane with a million little spheres, kind of floating around. And it's called the Dyson Sphere. The Dyson Spheres. She's created Dyson Spheres. So she's basically running multiple simulations of the world at the same time, loads and loads and loads. And the show that we've watched, wrap your head around this, okay? Bear with me. Is apparently a simulation. And there's this godlike Maddie, and she's manipulating things within the simulation. So we sort of see David come back very briefly and talk to Caspian, where Maddie has brought in like a different copy of David from a different simulation to go talk to Caspian. This is like as I'm trying to wrap my head around as I explain this. So Maddie like brings in normal David, saved from a parallel universe, to influence sort of Caspian, to get sort of intervening historical data download earlier, which I've put down, but I'm not sure what that means now as I'm speaking about it. But like, it's important that Caspian talks to David, so he's influenced to commit some actions later down the line. Is what's important.
So it's the cause and effect thing, making sure
cause
that
and
the
effect
cause
thing
occurs so that the effect occurs at the right point. Yeah.
And sort of God Maddie, her purpose for creating the Dyson Spheres to reunite her son and Caspian at the moment of death for each of them, and to find out how Caspian knew about the 117,649 years. Yeah. And that number of years ends up correlating to the time that it takes her to basically get her goal, to
figure out the kind of optimal situation where the world will be saved if things happen in this particular order of events.
So ultimately, it's a bit of a we're all living in the Matrix moment. Yeah, it was all a dream kind of thing.
Except for the fact that I think that we're also led to believe that, so each of them is a simulation, but they're also kind of, each of them is real. Like each of them is, there's something very strongly like the sort of parallel universe theory going on. I mean, it's sort of Marvel eat your heart out in terms of kind of like incorporating different like characters from different versions of the universe. I think that what it made me think of was like how we can treat this as being really quite meta. So the idea that essentially we watch this show and it plays out a version of what our future could look like if we continue down the path that it started with kind of AI and leads on to future things. But we're only seeing one version of how this could essentially happen. So we become essentially both people who are within the world, the way that Maddie is, and outside the world, viewing it the way that kind of God Maddie is. And I thought this made something quite interesting of the fact that this is an animated show, because it highlights to us the idea. I mean, obviously there's always the thing between the kind of the reader and the text, the viewer and the screen. But here we've got something like extra, which is this idea of kind of like a created version of our world that essentially kind of like we perceive and control and change, because it is so conspicuously created, because it is animated. And then within that, there's another level, which is like there's a created world within a created world. And one of the interesting things about having it as an animated show is that I think it makes a really effective idea of kind of the art portraying the characters is kind of like the same in the real world as depicted as the virtual world, but the virtual world then can be stretched in all the different ways. So it's like, step into a video game or into VR or whatever, and it sort of looks like the same world, and then you start to see the changes within it. So yeah, and it's a very beautiful aesthetic by and large, I think, particularly the backgrounds. I don't know whether I was very into the backgrounds.
Yeah. It's in the style of like Invincible or similar shows, but that kind of like bordering on a bit of like anime, but not really.
Yeah,
quite like
sort of
Western,
touch of that, but yeah,
Western style, but quite like flat, like 2D. But it's not,
especially
it's nice.
in the people, but then like it meant that every sort of detail of expression that was given sort of had added layers to it, because you kind of knew that every sort of shift was very significant.
Yeah, crazy. Recommend going to watch that.
Go.
That was such a good idea. Like that was, you started getting a really meta in there with the different like layers around your. I was like, wait a second.
What a load of rubbish. No, I mean, it comes back to this idea of like why do we think that these things are worth analysing? Well, because they do offer us a lens, and this one I think very conspicuously on a multi-layered.
It's a very, very good show, and I think it's a real shame no one else has heard of it. It was like,
I know.
It's it just, they butchered the marketing of it, I think was what happened. But please go watch Pantheon.
We're doing our bit then, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. It's on Netflix. Definitely such a good watch. Watched it literally in like 2 sittings.
No, I definitely recommend it. Cool. So, takeaway message,
mate. Don't clone yourself, and don't force your sort of ideals of prosperous, everlasting life on people by trying to burn their brains away into.
Read the small print before uploading yourself. Very important. Yeah.
So true.
Yeah. I think that there's a huge amount going on in this, and yet is also just enjoyable as well.
It is.
And I think
it's not as complicated. Like, it's complicated, but me and Claire, it's hard to speak about it, but the way they lay it out in the show is
we've pulled out the complications,
the
but
essentials,
it is also an enjoyable watch about the kind of characters and so on. So good. Okay, well, we will be back with Mickey 17 in a couple of weeks' time. In the meantime, we will have a newsletter out. Watch out for Marsha giving us the science on uploading your brain. And we're also got book reviews and music reviews and stuff going out every couple of weeks, as well as some reflections on how dystopia is playing out in the world. You can follow us on Instagram and on Blue Sky. You can get the newsletter on Substack. You can check out our website.
Keep an eye out.
Dystopian fiction has been moved to currentaffairs.com. And there will be more stuff coming out over the course of the summer. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much.